We are here to understand what is a breach. And if breach happens, then what is it that we have to do as an organization? What is it that we should do? And what is it that our organization needs to perform to make sure that the breaches do not happen? So let's get going. Top data breaches of 2022. My name is Akash Singh. I'm a data privacy expert, rather a CIPPE, a CIPM, a CIPT. By the way, I am a privacy consultant by profession. I'm also the founder of Tsaaro, and I have with me today Mr. Krishna Srivastava. But it's good to see you, and I hope my experience, my knowledge, and my incident responses to breaches across clients will give you some detail, some information about what we need to do, what happens in a breach, and let's talk about a few breaches without wasting a single minute. A bit about Tsaaro. Tsaaro is a leading privacy consulting services company in the world. What we do is we help with consulting services. So we do three things. We are an academy. We teach people privacy in academy.saro.com. What we also do is we are one of the largest consulting practices in India right now in privacy. So what we do is we help clients with GDPR, coming Indian PDPB, as well as UAE PDPL, Saudi PDPL, to kind of help them comply, not just on the paper, in terms of policy, but actually do things like privacy impact assessments. And what we also do is the third thing that we do is we resell tools and implement OneTrust, Big ID, Xtero, you name it, and they are in our tech stack. So what we do with our tech stack is we just don't solve the problem, we solve the problem 100% of privacy from starting to the end. So think privacy, think Tsaaro. This presentation is only for reference and educational purposes. This is not a legal advice. Speakers in the session do not represent Tsaaro, although we do, by the way, we are founders here. So anyways, it will be available on YouTube. We will talk about data breaches. So introduction to data breaches, what is targeted in the data breach? We'll talk about the impact that happens of data breaches of 2022. So guys, the question number one is not with Tsaaro, it's with you. The question is, what is a data breach? A bit into introduction, a data breach is an incident where information is stolen or taken away, right? Definition is important. The definition is unauthorized disclosure, unauthorized access, personal data transmitted, which got accessed, stored. By the way, I just heard a few days back that, the Chinese intrusion to the Indian, and not just Indian, the US and Indian internet cables that go below the sea, right? So what happened is they kind of put in their, information readers. They went below the sea and put in their information reader, trying to hack all the information through that level. So that is the level of intrusion and data breach that is there. So I get it. We are talking about one or two data breaches, but understand to what level these things have gone and how important a simple thing like data breach, or when we talk about unauthorized disclosure, till where it can go, from accessing one system to accessing whole world. Right, that is the data breach. That is the level of data breach. By the way, 85% by a Comparitech report, what we understood is 85% of breaches involved a human element. For example, there was an email, right? And people clicked on the link. Something got downloaded, their systems got hacked, whole company got hacked. GitHub password loss. 61% of breaches involve credentials, right? If your passwords are not strong enough, the systems are not strong enough. The human element is one of the toughest element to stop. 13% of breaches involved ransomware. You had to pay AIMS, right? One of the biggest attacks right now in past days is AIMS. Everything got stopped. People on the bed, dying bed, who had to get surgery. The hackers paused it and AIMS could do nothing. So at that level where we can't give services to people to survive, to help them be alive, I think that is the level where the criminals have gone to. The criminals are not on the roads anymore. They are on the dark web. They are in the system, and we have to fight against them because we are living in an era of data, online data. So a few things that we see, right? What these hackers target, right? What are they targeting? They're targeting weaker credentials, right? The credentials are weak, easier for them to get in. Third party vendors. Who are these third party vendors? Like, a small vendor you use, and that small vendor has access to your system and that or has access to your data. So hackers are trying to reach there and understand all that data or put in some controls and then got hacked. If you remember Air India data breach, the first thing that Air India data breach notification said, breach happened with Sita PSS, their vendor, Sita, SITA, PSS. So the first thing that they said was that the breach happened by Sita PSS, not by them. That is the level of vendor assessments vendor control that is, and the vendor contracts that are required in today's assets, the financial information. See, I think a lot of times people ask me, Akash, what is it that we are hiding? Why is data privacy, data security so important? See, the simple question is, if you do not have anything to hide, you do not need anything to secure. But if there is something to hide, like IP, health data, confidential data about people, that is exactly the time when you have to make sure that your assets are safe and secure. Employees, you have to make sure that, first of all, employee training is very, very important. It's paramount, the basic and the most important thing, that people are not doing mistakes by clicking in links or doing anything around that. Okay, so guys, next question. Data breaches can lead more than financial losses to a company. Do you agree, or do you think that only financial loss is the only thing? Data breaches can lead to more than financial losses in a company. Breaches cause a lot of issues, right? What is the impact? The impact is, if it is not addressed, it can lead to harm to the people. If, let's say, credit card data goes out, somebody can come and use all those credit cards and just buy anything you want. Impact on the business, revenue loss, damage. The biggest damage is reputation damage, loss of IP, right? Everything that we are trying to hide is gone. Hidden costs, like, obligations to all the supervisory authorities. Online vandalism, like, once you get a breach, people do not forget it. The moment you put something on LinkedIn, they will reply, hey, but you were in a breach. So you can't breach security anymore. So I think this is very, very serious. And unlawful accidental destruction, unauthorized access, storage, anything that happens also leads to our business function stopping, like it happened in AIMS. The business function stopped because of a breach. Okay. So now I will, hand over the session to Mr. Krishna Srivastava to talk a bit about technical things into Twitter's API vulnerability. Right. So, Krishna, over to you to explain to people.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you, Akash, for that handover. So I hope all of you understand what a data breach is and what could be the impact of a data breach to an organization and also to an individual, right? Because when you look at data breaches, we focus a lot on the kind of data that has been breached. And in most cases, it is email addresses, and people think, how does it matter if my email address is leaked out, right? Because email addresses are something that you give out to a lot of different services. You may use that email address to register to a lot of different applications as well. But what you need to also understand is how those email addresses could be leveraged by malicious actors to conduct certain malicious activities. As an example, if my corporate email ID and credentials are exposed on the dark web, and if my organization says that I have MFA enabled, so I'm not worried about it. But at the same time, what you also need to understand as an organization is if your employee used that email address and that password, the combo, basically the credentials, to log on to an application where MFA is not enabled, right? So it is not necessary that you have MFA as well as single sign-on enabled for all different applications where your work account may be used. So that is the impact that a data breach could have. Even if you have MFA enabled, you're not fully protected, because in the end, it matters a lot on the inventory you have, whether you are allowing your work accounts to log into different applications that are used in the industry, and how close are you actually monitoring your supply chain or your third party vendors. Now, looking at the Twitter API vulnerability, so the API vulnerability in Twitter has existed for a while, right? The hacking group that discovered it made it public that they are aware of it, and Twitter also was aware of it as an organization, but at the same time they didn't act much on it, because the organization or this hacking group was able to exfiltrate multiple different kind of data sets, including email addresses or users phone number. Now the problem here is that if you look at Twitter as a social media platform, you would also understand that Twitter also has email accounts of people like the president of the United States. It also has email addresses of other celebrities, or maybe more famous individuals or celebrities across the globe. The kind of impact that someone can create using those credentials is not limited to phishing. They can also do identity fraud, right? Because if you look at the number of crypto scams or these pump and dump terminology that is used, if you look at these scams, a lot of these scams have been pushed by celebrities or people who are using their status as a famous person to push certain scams, right? So if you have the necessary details of a celebrity, and if you can do an identity fraud you can potentially make a lot of money as a malicious actor by promoting a cryptocurrency that may not be a viable option, but at the same time, it could be used to generate a lot of revenue. Now, focusing a bit more on the Twitter API vulnerability. Before, of course, the vulnerability was patched, the data was shared on multiple different breach forums. Hackers, how they usually, show a proof that they have a particular set of data is by shelling out or kind of giving out a few GBs of data for free, making it publicly available so that independent parties can verify and, of course, also confirm that they have actually breached an organization. When independent parties or security researchers confirm that they have actually breached an organization, that is when they start setting a price to it. Right now, hackers know that this is something that is confirmed. This is something that I can potentially sell as a hacker, and then they move around it. Right. So that is the typical structure that organizations use. And if you have heard about a few data breach fines, you may have heard about the Ireland's Data Protection Commission. It's been doing quite the rounds around it. Quite famous data protection office giving out a lot of fines. So the breach count for Twitter was around 7 million Twitter profiles. Right. Those were the number of accounts that were hacked and that were also made public on dark web forums. Right. So some of the activities that you can do as a part of API vulnerabilities of sorts is to also have API security requirements as a part of your security checklists. So if you're not conducting any kind of security scanning activities for APIs, you will have to understand that it needs to be a part of your security program or plan. Now let's talk a bit about Uber breach because this is one of the incidents where someone actually was held accountable and someone was also fired around it, right? Because if you read the news recently, you may be aware that the Uber CISO was, fired, as well as there were certain lawsuits that are going around in the US around it. Now, how did this take place? What were the key steps? Looking at what the hacker did when they made sure that they understood some kind of data was a part of this hacker. They contacted one of the Uber employees through WhatsApp and pretended to be a member of Uber's IT and asked the employee to approve the MFA notifications. Now, what happened here was an MFA fatigue attack. This is one of the newer methods that hackers have identified to get rid of the MFA security layer that is there. So what happens is that hackers send out so many notifications. Now they have figured out a way, or they have probably exploited a vulnerability to send out notifications or to make sure that when organizations do not have a set timeout for the number of attempts you try and log into an account, this is what could happen. Right? Naturally, organizations should ideally block access for an account from a particular IP when the attempt is more than three, more than five, as per the organization's limit. But at the same time, if you don't do that, then an MFA fatigue attack is very well possible. Right. So this is what we discussed. And if you have a question around this, I'm happy to answer it. I'll also read Sujoy's question on the chat section. He read an article on LinkedIn that a password manager LastPass has been breached and all passwords secured in Vault were compromised. So that's right, Sujoy. I don't personally use a password manager just because of this reason, because I cannot trust a third party entity to store my passwords. So I've created a simple script of sorts for myself and I just store it in my local machine. I encrypt it and I make sure that my passwords are secure. So that's what I do personally. And we were talking about the breach and how it occurred, and it ended with the this particular attacker getting vulnerability reports about Uber that have not been fixed. Imagine, I mean, you don't even have to go through the entire IT infra system. Uber conducted a VAPT exercise, a vulnerability assessment exercise. They had the reports ready, and this IT employee had access to these reports. So that's all the person needed. They have a full list of vulnerabilities that Uber has. Now they could use it to further exploit Uber or probably, exfiltrate more data that is highly confidential to Uber. What Uber did was they came up with access management program around it. They made sure that all passwords are changed. They made sure that all controls have been reiterated, controls have been assessed again. They also made sure that data leakage services are also strengthened, also bolstered, so that any kind of leakage that happens to an external domain is something that they can detect better. Now, another case study is around Dropbox, which was a phishing attack. So this is something that's pretty common these days. So a lot of developers or in your organization may use your organization's GitHub account and use it for personal reasons, which makes their GitHub account either public or it either makes them susceptible to attacks. So if you are an organization, then you need to identify whether those developers' accounts are public or not, or whether certain admin level GitHub accounts are public or not. Right. So to do that, you need to conduct vulnerability assessments. You need to conduct relevant external vulnerability assessments, is what I would suggest, because in these cases, it is better to have an external person come in and look into the kind of business structure you have, and then they would be able to come out with a specific plan for your business, right? Because you need to understand that your developers may not fully understand the repercussions of using their work GitHub account for personal reasons, or maybe just making it public. And in what happened here was that a threat actor gained access to an employee's GitHub account or a Dropbox developer's account. The compromised developer in turn provided the attacker with access to approximately 130 internal code repositories. Now, we discussed on how can a data breach have a great impact to the organization. A lot of you chose financial resources as one of the biggest one, but what you also need to understand is that an organization's major or the most important aspect of an organization like Dropbox could be their source repositories. If it's a SaaS company, if it's a tech company that's built on code, then their code is their biggest intellectual property. And if it's replicated, then they lose their business edge, which is not something any organization. Financial losses, reputational losses are always there, but for a tech company that is doing something groundbreaking or an advancement in technology, imagine what it costs to them when their intellectual property is out. Imagine what would happen to Tesla if all their technologies around building a car is outsourced or kind of exfiltrated. So that's the impact of what could happen when your IP is out. Now, some of the phishing attack better things that you could do to avoid these phishing attacks. As we discussed, awareness initiatives are better. Then you need to make sure that users are trained based on their roles. You need to train your finance team differently because they would get phishing emails around voices. You will have to train your IT team differently because they would get phishing emails around IT service tickets, right? So you need to understand the context of their daily operations and provide trainings to them based on that. Having data security platforms also exist. It helps you spot signs of an attack. And of course, some basic activities such as not giving information to people you don't know or not responding to emails that you're not expecting are some simple guidelines that you can share across to all your employees. Now, because of course, we are a data protection consulting firm, so we talk a lot about privacy and security. But at the same time, I also want to understand whether all of you know the time frame to notify a regulatory authority of a personal data breach under the GDPR. Right. So, what do you think is the time frame to notify a regulatory authority if you're an organization and you have identified a data breach? Okay. So, I think a lot of the people who have joined us are probably from a privacy background because I see most people choosing the within 72 hours time frame. So, that's absolutely correct. There are also a few terms and conditions, the fine print that you may want to read about it, especially if you're in a different jurisdiction. So, please be cognizant of that. Right. One of the other case studies is Medibank. And of course, Medibank is a huge organization. It's a health insurer. So now you understand what happens when a health insurer occurs or suffers a data breach. A lot of health information goes out. So there are different laws that are governing it that will be affecting this data breach now. Right. So now a breach has occurred. Right. What do you do as an organization after the breach to minimize the impact? The first one is to identify the extent of the breach, right? You may spot signs of an attack. You may feel that a breach has occurred if any of your information is public. You may have a relevant source telling you about it. But how do you understand the extent of a breach? How do you understand how the malicious actor, where the malicious actor is there in your IT infra? How have they spread it across different systems, and what accesses do they have? So in this one, you'll have to confirm. You'll have to do an assessment, analysis, probably a forensic analysis to understand what were the systems that have been breached, what are the kind of data that may have gone out, and what is the channel that the malicious actor is using to send out data to an external domain. Once you confirm it, once you have a fair understanding of the extent of the data breach, you reach out to the regulatory bodies. You reach out to, under the GDPR, you'll have to reach out to the supervisory authority if personal data has been breached as a part of this data breach. And you will have to inform them within 72 hours of the occurrence of the breach. Right. So there's a difference between them. Uh, the first thing is that you'll have to confirm the occurrence, and that does not mean that you will probably take 6 months to confirm the occurrence of the breach. You'll have to do it as soon as possible. And whenever you have a confirmation on it, you'll have to reach out to the regulatory body, notify them that these many records are known to have been breached from our organization. Then the last part would be to contain it. Now that you've identified the IT systems that were breached, you have identified the databases that were affected, you'll have to take some precautionary measures. You'll also have to take some incident containment measures to make sure that it does not spread across to your other systems, right? This is what you need to understand when you have to also contain it. And of course, simple activities such as saving your password, securing your password, rotating your password are very, very important notions that you need to consider. Now, when we also say that you'll have to notify the regulatory bodies under the GDPR, there may be cases where you may also have to notify the data subject in terms of a personal data breach that may pose significant harms, especially something involving credentials. You may also have to notify the data subjects in those cases. Right? This happens on a case to case basis. You may not have to notify data subjects every time, but at the same time, you would also want to notify the relevant people. Now, and we also say that we have to share it with the regulatory bodies. You may also have to report the hack or the data breach to local police bodies, or maybe any other body in that particular country that is responsible for cybersecurity as whole. In India, you may have to report it to certain. In the Europe, you may have to report it to ENISA or any similar organization that looks after cybersecurity. And at the same time, you may also have to engage a legal counsel, like Sushmita also mentioned. You may have to engage a legal counsel, but at the same time, that legal counsel aspect, Sushmita, may not be relevant in every organization or every country. You may try and understand that there needs to be a plan around data breach notification, right? Every organization that we help build their privacy or security programs, we usually give them a data breach notification plan on what happens, what are the responsible bodies they have to report to, what are the certain conditions, and how to assess who are the relevant bodies where they have to report, right? So these are something that you need to have as a part of your data breach plan. Now, we spoke about three steps around confirming the breach, notifying the relevant regulatory bodies, and containing the assessment. Then you will have to follow your incident response plan. If this is not in place, then I would recommend you or someone from your team to also speak with your organization's senior stakeholders and come up with an incident management procedure and policy. So once you have an incident response plan, you would be more prepared in case of data breach. Right? In today's world, no one is protected from a data breach. Even the largest organizations in the world, from because of a simple mistake or maybe a human element, a data breach can easily occur. So what you have to understand as an organization is you need to be prepared for it. You need to have a response plan to it. You'll have to communicate with your customers. You will have to communicate with your employees. You will have to communicate with your clients, and you'll have to be transparent, and you'll have to also reassure them of the steps they have taken. As an example, there was this Indian company that was that was compromised because of corporate espionage. And at the same time, what they did, what the great thing about how they were containing the incident was that they opened a specific page to give out updates on the incident, because they were also in the cybersecurity domain, so they had to make sure that they are following what they preach. So they opened up a new page. They made sure that all the comments are addressed, all the concerns are addressed, and they were able to come up with a very clear and coherent communication channel to address concerns of this data breach. Right. So those kind of techniques, those kind of platforms, they may have it. They may already have created it as a part of their response plan, and that's what they leverage when an actual incident occurred. Now, when we are done with this entire assessment of the data breach, the last part is to evaluate what went wrong. How did this happen? Right? People usually start this last step as soon as they identify that a data breach has happened. They focus more on understanding why it happened rather than understanding what is the landscape that they're looking at and how do they contain it. Right? After the containment, after everything is done, then is probably the best time to look at the evaluation part. the lessons learned. What have you learned from this incident? Why did this happen? What was the root cause analysis? Once you're done with all that, that is the last step of the incident response activity or a data breach activity, so that you can use those learnings for your future data breaches that may happen. And you may also use it as a reference point in case anything similar happens in your organization, right? At this point in time, I will also ask all of you to put up your questions. If you have any questions at all, I'm happy to take it up. I'm happy to respond to them to the best of my knowledge. So use the chat section, use it to the extent that you want, and put up your questions so that we can also take it up. Right. I think Tavin has a question that he remembers a website where you can put your email and tells you whether it has been part of any data breach or not. Right, Tavin, I'll just put up the website. It's called Have I Been Pwned? We use it a lot uh, to help people understand, around the repercussions of this. I'll put up the link here. This is what it's called, haveibeenpwned.com. It's managed by a Microsoft Advisor, and you can potentially use it as well. Right. So that also brings us to the end of this particular webinar. It's been a short one, but we hope there were a lot of insights that you could take back. Also, try and understand how you can uh, potentially structure your security budget and program based on your organization's unique business objectives. Depending on how your organization functions, is how you should align or create your security plan, not the other way around because security supports your business objectives, supports your business strategies, and should obviously at all times be aligned to it. So thank you, everyone. And I hope I connect with you again. We will end this session for today. And thank you for joining in.